electronic augmented communicators. Okay. The vocabulary for these special populations shows the same pattern for core fringe ratios and for the absence of picture producers. Stewart, this is Sheila Stewart. She's at the National Children's Hospital or National Rehabilitation Hospital in DC. Stewart identified the vocabulary use patterns of 65 to 74-year-old and 75 to 85-year-old adults. Communication samples of routine conversations were collected from 2 cohorts of 10 individuals each, 5 men and 5 women, using voice-activated portable audio tape recorders. These were, where did Sheila Stewart find these? Well, she found them in a Methodist church in Lincoln, Nebraska. They were, older people, and they volunteered, and they put the tape recorder, the same kind of procedure. Okay. The frequency of word use patterns across the age cohorts is quite similar. The 25 most commonly occurring words was 37% for the 65 to 74-year-old cohort, 39% for the 75 to 80-year-old cohort. The percentage of the total sample represented by the 250 most common words was 78% for the 65 to 74-year-old cohort and 78% for the 75 to 85-year-old cohort. The actual single words used by the cohort showed a large degree of overlap. Although the topics of the cohorts were sometimes quite different, the overlap among the cohorts was over 90%. The differences in topics, the greatest was the 65 to 75-year-old women, 74-year-old women, as opposed to the 75 to 85-year-old men. The men were talking about stories from their lives largely, and the 65 to 74-year-old women were still involved with the rearing of their grandchildren. And a couple of the men had actually been in the Pacific during the Second World War. And okay, so you're changing a diaper, or you're wading ashore at Guadalcanal, wet, smelly, the odor, tired, dangerous, okay, what I'm saying is you can just, oh man, you should have been there. You should have been there. It was awful. They left them with me. Nobody was there but me. It's, one person is talking about being stuck with babysitting and having her daughter and son-in-law not come home until way late, and the other guy's talking about what it was like to be crouched down at Guadalcanal, but the words are the same. Just like I found at Westinghouse, it didn't matter whether we were talking about, the water flowing for bathrooms, for, inside the electrical plant, or whether we were talking about internally generated missiles. The words are the same. Okay, here are the Stewart words. This is 174 most frequently occurring words. It's 72% of the total words. And take a look at the A's with me. And you have these words, of course. A, about, all right, always, am, and, another, any, anything, are, around, as, ask, at. Guys, do you see how dead bang this is on the children's words? And how very close to dead bang it is on the adolescent words from Sydney? Look over here. Stuff. Something. Look at said. Say, she, see, should. The overlap is incredible. And let's take a look at where Stewart harvested these. Okay. I'd like someone to read the places where these words were harvested. Cindy, would you do that for us, please?
Okay. Places, participants, home, restaurants, apartment complexes, community rooms, stores, malls, hospitals, churches, cars, friends and relatives' homes, senior citizen centers, and outdoors.
Okay. Who would like to do, is that a lot of places?
Yeah.
Who would like to do the activities? Yes.
Okay, activities, talking on the telephone, eating, household projects, shopping, church study, playing games, reviewing hobbies, volunteer work, watching movies, transportation to events, and visiting.
Okay. This is really a broad range of areas and times. By the way, I had twice in my 25 years experience participated in vocabulary selection for ministers, retired ministers who had had strokes. And they had led church study groups, and we wanted to be sure to give them the vocabulary they could use in church study. And, you know, I mean, you name the book of the Bible, I mean, you know, Pastor Jones is going to wants to give a class on Kings, First Kings and Samuel, you know, and parallels, you know, and then, you know, all of a sudden you've got begat, you know, you're searching through all the words that are appropriate there, or he's going to, you know, the church study group is going to be on Job. What kind of words are you going to put in? And, well, let me tell you the book of Job in core vocabulary. There was a good man, and he loved God, and God and the bad person had this talked, and the bad person said the reason the good man loved God was because he got good things. But God said no. And so God sent very bad things to the good man. And the good man still loved God. And the good man's friends told him that God was sending him bad things because he was bad. And then God sent all the good things back to the good man and sent all the bad things to the good man's friends. I just told you the book of Job in, you know, a minute, and I used all core vocabulary. So what I would like to say is we were a million miles off. What we needed to give to these retired ministers was not specialized theological terms to deal with Job's sense of isolation from God. You know what I mean? We just needed to give basic words. And right now there's a project coming out of Temple University that is very good in many ways, but I think is somewhat misdirected in certain ways, and I'll tell you how I think it's misdirected. At Temple, they have found several hundred sexual abuse words. Did you know that 80% of people who use augmentative communication who live in nursing homes or other kind of custodial care have experienced sexual abuse? I mean, the numbers are just astronomical, and so it was thought that it should be important to develop a vocabulary for this. And in certain ways it was good, but I think in certain ways it was misdirected, because every possible human position, every possible human perverse position was given some Latin name. Like fellatio, and I think all you need to say is, he touched me wrong place. He touched me wrong place with mouth. He put hand wrong place. He do bad thing with finger. I mean, it's there. You know, you don't need 100 Latin terms to describe various you know, perverse things. You can say it all in very simple language. I mean, I mean, even Winston Churchill's most eloquent terms, a man given to being very wordy, is never have so many owed so much to so few. You know, when you look at blood, sweat, you know what I mean? You know, blood, sweat, tears. So I believe that core vocabulary will take you a tremendous way. I believe most of what we say is core, and I believe almost everything that we can say can be core. Okay. Here are the vocabulary usage of people with moderate to severe cognitive impairments. This is a strange and wonderful study. It's the first special vocabulary study. It's mine and O'Connor. It was published in London. Don't you love the name of the journal? The lack of political correctness, you know. So if you think political correctness is a pain in the neck, look at what it was like before. I mean, you know, look at what it was like before. What I would like to say is this journal has now changed its name to the Journal for Learning Disabilities. But again, we see many of the same words, and I did the A's, the T's, and the W's, and I was going to give you more, but okay, here we are. But you see, by the way, this was the first article ever to use the term core vocabulary. This is where the term comes from, and of the 2,800 different words that they found at this, it was a psychiatric hospital in London, they found that 500 or 600 of them were used over and over again, and they called this the core. And then they've had a core, which was around 200 or 300. So, I mean, this idea of the core, I think, stems from the work. I know the first time I've seen the word core vocabulary was in mine and O'Connor. Okay. Core vocabulary usage of youth with moderate or severe learning impairment. This is a suite of articles sponsored by Marianne Romsky and Rose Sevchik. This happens to be from Laura Adamson's doctoral dissertation. And would someone volunteer to read the first paragraph for us here? Your partner? Here, right there. Yeah.
AAC devices for people with severe cognitive disabilities and little or no functional speech primarily contain nouns which seem easiest to acquire and evaluate. Effective and more diverse vocabulary was assessed.
All right. This is part of a suite of studies done by Romsky and Sevchik on people with moderate to severe mental retardation. These guys really had, many of them had severe retardation. And by the way, they used lexicograms. They did not use iconic graphics for these folks. So there was no reading involved here. Lexicograms, we don't talk about them much anymore. Lexicograms were things developed by the Rumbaughs in Georgia for use with the great apes when they were trying to teach them to communicate. And there are two things you can do with a graphic. You can make the graphic resemble whatever it's symbolizing, or you can make the graphic be different from other graphics in the same set. And that was what they tried to do with the apes, because they found that the apes really didn't recognize pictures of something for something. You know, many of you have dogs who, our dog used to hear things on television, but she never looked at the things on television. You know what I mean? Like, animals don't, you know, okay. But here's what lexicograms look like. and you combine them. There are actually 9 elements, and this might be Coca-Cola, and this might be ham sandwich. Do you see what I mean? They're not iconic at all. And they're called lexicograms. Okay. Excuse me. Another reader over here, please. Would you read this next paragraph?
Okay, the use of speech output devices by 12 youths with moderate or severe mental retardation and severe spoken language disability showed core vocabulary was used as soon as it was introduced and expanded the focus of conversation both at home and at school.
Okay, now let me show you what vocabulary they used. Romsky and Sevchek were primarily interested in social regulatory vocabulary as opposed to referential vocabulary. They were very interested in the pragmatics. If we look at it, however, from the point of view of core and fringe, we see the same pattern emerge. Almost all these referential vocabularies were fringe, and in fact all the social regulatory were core. This was the pre-existing system. It was a lexigram-based system, and look at this stuff. You see how foodie it is? Are we surprised? No. I mean, you know, this foodie, TV, you know, okay. Yes, wait, thank you, please stop, no more. Okay, these were they called them social regulatory, but they're in fact core as well. And these are fringe as well. Okay, here's what it looked like. I want to show you when they started out that more than half of the utterances from these individuals were referential fringe words. Okay, these were various stages of introduction. And at one point, it was 18% became core and 32% fringe. It started out 49% fringe, and in the end, it was 28 and 27%. So these 16 became used as much as these by the end of the second year. And again, most of these guys had pretty severe cognitive impairment, and they were accessing them by lexicograms. Okay, very interesting stuff. This is Romsky, you know, and you can get it here, December 1992. All right. And by the way, there are several more articles in that thing where they also found that the student tended to use the lexicograms in subject, verb, object, word order, which was very interesting because these guys were so impaired. They didn't use object, subject, verb. You know, I mean, they did SVO, subject, verb, object, word order, and they found that when they placed modifiers, they placed them before or after as we would in regular English. And so they followed the syntagmatic axis across. Very interesting stuff. There are 4 articles that they did all together based upon these studies. Okay, this is a study. This was Katya Hill's doctoral dissertation. I was there at her defense. It was in 2001. And it's 40 hours of interviews with 20 self-taught augmented communicators using speech-generating devices. It was documented by the Language Activity Monitor, an automatic logging program, and videotape. Data analysis indicates the 100 most frequently occurring words account for 62% of the total words used. The most frequently occurring 250 words, look at this number again, comprise 78% of the total words. We're going to take a break in a minute, don't worry. Okay, the overlap between and among the adult and child word list, Hal, Benaji, Bugleman, Marvin, Bland, and Stewart, and the Hill list of adult AAC users is over 90%. The Hill vocabulary was harvested from open conversation with multiple topics, including personal background, education, device usage, therapy experiences, and life experiences. Here are the longer studies are now in press, but I have permission to use the first 100 here. Look at these words. The Liberator and the Pathfinder were the devices used because one of the purposes of the study was to see what language representation system was being used. And Liberator and Pathfinder use word prediction, single meaning pictures, and multi-meaning pictures. Do these words look like the Benaji list? You know, the others we've been seeing in alphabetical order, but this is a frequency list. And look at word, I mean, are these complex, different, better, been, first, device, you know, could, actually, Unity, that's the name of the software. They use there, out, who, which, school, now, most, use speech therapy, if, get, as, then. You see these words? They're the same words as other adults. And core vocabulary, it seems, is consistent across populations. Places, topics, and activities. Core vocabulary does not feature many picture producers. Core vocabulary dominates the speech of toddlers. Core vocabulary is difficult to represent pictorially for early communicators with undeveloped reading and spelling skills. And core vocabulary does not feature high motivation nouns. Okay, it's break time.
He's going to lead us on a discussion of friendship and how we can support friendship in people who use augmented communication devices. And he's a real interesting human being as well, very, very fun person who will be just a great speaker. He wrote the ad, he's an ad exec in his other life. It's not TV, it's HBO. So it's just great words and very fun. That's Tuesday, 4:30 to 6:30. Thursday, 4:30 to 6:30. Try to get your AAC users to join us for Out and About AAC in the community, because we're just doing some really fun stuff. We're meeting at Desert Sky Mall at 4:30 to 6:30 on Thursday. And it's AAC users and their parent or family members. And Deanna, I think, was doing flyers. Maybe.
Well,
Yeah. Well, we will. We'll do flyers by the
We'll
end.
have them after lunch.
Yeah, we'll do flyers sometime.
First thing first.
Yeah. Thanks. And I also have flyers. Southwest is looking for speech pathologists and OTs who are interested in doing follow-up for students who've received their assistive technology devices and are waiting. It's in the box, and the family's saying, now what do I do? And so we really need you. So talk to me if you're interested as a speech pathologist or an OT. You have flyers.
We have another guest speaker, another nationally renowned speaker coming up on March 7th and 8th. Gail Bowser's coming to talk about assistive technology. There's one day about assistive technology implementation that would be for people who are in the trenches, and then a half a day for administrators. And that's March 7th and 8th. And I will be getting flyers for that as well.
This page that Janet just handed you, these pages are in fact were the last page on my handout, but I approved I thumbed through and I saw it was all there, and I said copy it, and guess what? It wasn't all there. It was missing that back page, and we'll be having reference to that very shortly. All right, the next thing we're going to, by the way, I know Richard Ellenson, and it will be a fascinating couple hours. Okay, language, how is vocabulary used? And what is early language like? Well, what's the difference between speech and language? Would some SLP like to say that? Well, okay. Yes?
Language is any kind of communication, and speech is more vocal.
Language is the system that gives speech meaning. I like that as a definition. Language is the system that gives speech meaning. It is significantly different from speech in the sense, well, take a look at sign language. The signs are one thing, the system that gives them meaning is another. And so the system of language is a truly remarkable system, and it is well, it's just truly remarkable, and it is very biological. I remember when I was in graduate school, the first book on this I read was Eric Lenneberg's book, The Biological Foundations of Language. And I found that to be a kind of shocking concept, that there was language in there, and it was biology as well. But let me just say what is going on with language here in terms of biology is that we seem to be born to talk. We have a whole network of connections, nerves and connections that are pre-wired to make us able to understand language and to understand the systems. Throughout the whole world, in human language, there are only about 100 different sounds that are actually used as phonemes in any language. No matter what culture, no matter where you are, you're going to be using a collection of 40 or 50 of these 100 phonemes. And that in itself is pretty remarkable. Noam Chomsky said that someone arriving from Mars would think we all spoke the same language. I love to overhear language conversation, and there were some people from Central Asia sitting next to me at a restaurant here in Phoenix a couple nights ago when I was on my way to Tucson. And they were speaking, and you could hear the rhythms of their conversations. Da 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 da. And it was. That's what Chomsky means. It has the same rhythms. And it's very much, native to us as biologically. But in terms of biology and this network of things, we are as born to talk as we are born to walk. It's a biological event that we walk. It's also, strangely enough, a cognitive event that we walk. In other words, if you would not help your child, we all help the child by holding out our arms, and the child walks forward, and we're very happy, so we reinforce that as much as we can. But if we didn't do that, if we just ignored that, wouldn't all typically developing children just walk on their own? They sure would. Because yet, is this an informational thing they learn? Well, it is, because they have to learn how to hold all of their muscles. This is material deeply embedded in the neuromotor centers. But it is not material they're born with, it's material they're set up to learn. And then they learn it with their own personal neurology. Language is very much like that. Language is something we're born to do. How many of you use the term language acquisition? We use that term instead of language learning. 70 years ago, it was thought that language was learned in the way that we learn other things, with reinforcement protocols. You would say something and it wouldn't work, and then you would readjust what you said until you were doing approximations toward a goal, and then that you would learn language along behaviorist paradigms. Do you see what I mean? But in the end, that appears not to be what happens, because children at a very early age have deep, non-conscious, but cognitive nonetheless, understandings of language function. And we are, by the way, they're very good and very bad for you. I was trying to get some vegetables, and instead we got deep fried vegetables, which I have to be restrained from going after. You will not be disappointed in the taste of these.
I will bring another bowl for you guys. So pass them, just pass them around.
Okay, now, remember I was giving you the example of any, that any couldn't be used? That is the kind of thing I mean. You know, that, didn't we talk about any not being able to be an object? When did you learn that? Did your mom take you aside and say, dear, any can't be a direct object unless you have a negative modifier? Question format, sir. No. This whole very complex set of rules was internalized by you before 36 months. And there are too many rules, and it's too complex, and I'm going to show you some of these for it to have been what we call learning in any classical sense. We were prepared biologically to do this. And I'm going to talk about that, and this is kind of an introduction to how language is, in my opinion, the centerpiece, not speech, but although they all work together, how language is, in my opinion, the centerpiece of what needs to drive an AAC device. Okay. Now, what is the difference between language and vocabulary? Well, words are only one component of language. The system that gives words their meaning and usage is language. And I want to talk about the footprint of the word put. Now, have you ever been transferring some computer material from one program to another, from an email to Microsoft Word, and you get it from one to the other, and then you find there are all of these mysterious tabs and commands around words or paragraphs or lines, and you have to figure out what's down there? Well, almost every word in English has that kind of thing with it. Let me show you here. The word put. There are two slots after put that almost always have to be filled in order for put to achieve meaning. One of them is a direct object, and the other is a locative, which means a positional modifier, and it's usually done with a preposition. I can put my glasses on the table, but I can't put my glasses, can I? I can't put on the table either, can I? I've got to put the Crayolas on the table. I can't put the Crayolas, can I? I have to put the Crayolas under the table, in the waste can, on the cart. And this locative is almost always involved in some kind of a preposition. I can put my glasses down. I can even put them up. So you see this right here. Okay. What's the difference between my and mine? Well, there's an enormous difference in terms of slots. Aren't they great?
Very nice.
Yeah. My and mine. Well, mine can be a direct object or a subject. This is, I own this, okay? Mine is on the table. Would you hand me mine? Can mine be a direct object? In fact, there are a couple of slots here. My big marker. This slot is not necessary, but this slot is necessary. My has to have something to modify. Do you think it's mysterious? Which of these two words comes in first? Mine. Now, we think it's because the kids are particularly possessive, and they certainly are that, but there is a syntactical reason here, is that to use my, you've got to know a noun. And if you're going to start making, MLU, mean length of utterance, this is a thing very interesting for speech-language pathologists, because children develop through a series of different lengths, different mean lengths, until they reach full language development. And mean length of utterance is a very important measure of that. And it's important because it's an easy measure, and it can be quite revealing. But generally, kids say 1 to 2 words. When kids start talking, 2.25 words is a lot. They start around 1.75, namely not quite 2-word utterances. And mine is what is called a pivot. It is another pivot. It hot. You see, it's the subject. Find it. What is it? It's the object. So kids can pivot different words around it. They can pivot different words. Pivot different words around mine.
Put it.
Okay, that's it. Put it, but do mine. Put mine. No, okay. It mine. It mine. Mine here. Get mine. Fix mine. Wear mine. See, mine is a beautiful pivot. It is a beautiful pivot. These are some of the earliest pivots kids use. It and mine. And what do they have in common? They can be direct objects or subjects. And, okay, so this system that gives language meaning is a very complex system, and kids begin acquiring it. And do you ever have, computers used to have those little set switches? Well, language is like a bunch of set switches. One of the first things it wants to find out is what's the subject, and it's already set up to find subjects. It's already set up to find objects. It's already set up to find verbs. And there are miraculous things that happen in this context. Take a look at the simple verb open. It's an action verb, it's a verb, it refers to a specific action, right? But if I open this door, that's one action. If I open a window, it's another action. If I open the curtain, it's another action. If I open the box, it's another action. So it doesn't refer to a specific action at all. It refers to any action that will produce a kind of result. Now, we would think that action words describe actions rather than results, but they can describe all sorts of things, and this is very seemingly complicated stuff, but it is no more complicated than what's involved in my standing here, is it? How many muscles am I coordinating, consciously or unconsciously, when I'm standing here? Oh, hundreds. I think a couple of hundred. Am I thinking, my gastrocnemius should be just a little tighter on the left leg. Let's ease into that one, you know. But that's what's happening at some level. You see, these are unconscious cognitive functions that are actually going on. And language is very much like this. And also, although this is unconscious cognitive, you know, stuff I'm doing right now with my muscles, if I had been born with cerebral palsy and never have done this, although my whole brain is set up to find out all that information and to store it and use it, if I had never been able to walk, would I know how to conduct these balancing? So it's innate, but only in the sense that it's like a negative there.
Well, like the children who've had cataracts and have them removed, and there's some problem with visual interpretation of information after a certain time because the parts of the brain that were supposed to be used for that have not been activated.
Well, that part, the ocular processing areas, the visual processing areas, are huge parts of our brain, but they have to have the experience. And I was picking the walking example because seeing is a more passive process than walking, and language is a more active process, I think, than seeing. It's more like walking because you have to have the experience of assembling your hennies, of put it there. You have to have that experience, just like you have to have the experience of walking to know unconsciously where to put your calf muscles. Okay, now, how do we get this experience? Well, kids build pivot grammars. Mine here. And then they'll learn not only mine, will they say, where your? What would they say? Where yours? Because they know your is a my word, isn't it? Yours is a mine word. And folks, this stuff is so complicated, and by the way, 50 or 60% of kids will be doing it very correct, will be doing it actively and correctly by 24 months. Now, they didn't learn that in any classical learning sense. And if you've ever studied a foreign language, you know how difficult that can be. Okay, so, all right. Now, let's take a look at the word look. Now, you can say it, she looks great, or look, guys. But if in any other usage, you have to combine it with a preposition. Look at the screen, look out the window, look into the hall, look in the hall, look up a word, look over this material. So when you use look, your next word, there's a slot there, that's usually there, and that slot is for a preposition. And in that case, it's usually called an adprep, meaning an adverb and preposition in an adprep. So, look, now, if you're doing a communication aid, and you have an action word page, that sounds very linguistic, doesn't it? But that's only doing word class grammar, meaning dividing words up into different classes, which is very interesting, but it doesn't necessarily relate to how they come together and make sense. If you have put on a page and look on a page, with about 10 other verbs, say. You don't want to overwhelm the child, all the clinical stipulations there. Why won't the child use look and put? Because when he uses look, he's got to go to another area for a preposition. And then that preposition has to be followed by the rest of the prepositional phrase. Look out the window. You've got to go to an adjective or to a noun or something. So you've got to go through multiple pages. And this is very cognitively disorienting to form a short string of words. And that's why I would like to say language is, look at the word put. When you select put, what you're going to have to select next? You're going to have a direct object following it. Unless you just say put. Put, and then, okay. So, if our systems are not set up to have easy access to what comes before and has to come before and what comes after and what has to come after these words, and you send people on extra linguistic tasks, you're never going to get language usage, in my opinion. Let me give you an example of what is the difference between a linguistic task and an extra linguistic task. A linguistic task is knowing that mind can be a direct object. You don't know it, you just use it. You know what I mean? It's just unconscious knowledge. Or knowing that my requires some kind of a noun after it. You just know it, it's just there. Those are linguistic tasks, and they operate outside the realm of awareness once we've had a little experience. But an extra linguistic task is knowing that mind is on the same page as a bunch of other things. An extra linguistic task is knowing that after you've just selected one verb, you have to go back to master page and then hit little words. Those are extra linguistic tasks and require cognitive, conscious attention, which makes your linguistic stuff be discontinuous. So there's linguistic, and then you've got to go into this cognitive stuff, and then there's a linguistic moment, and then there's this extra linguistic stuff that's got to go on. And one of the goals and objects, I think, of our work in AAC is being conscious of language all the time. And we're going to talk about that as we move on. What did children really say? There have been many studies in the past 50 years about how early communicators use language. One of the first and most famous study is by Roger Brown in his book, First Language, The Early Stages. How many of you are familiar with Brown's stages? Okay, most SLPs are. But Brown's stages have now become everybody's stages. And I just got the psycholinguistic text that's being used in communication sciences and disorders at Pitt. And they're still using Brown. I bought a copy. I just wanted to be sure that I wasn't giving you stuff that was in any way dated. But Brown, it's what they do is they do different people's renditions of Brown, or as quoted from Brown. And basically, this stuff has formed the bedrock of our knowledge about how children acquire language. In Brown, we find a dominance of core vocabulary, and there's an absence of nouns. Okay, this is stage one. Did you see that? I gave you a copy of that. By the way, when you're actually reading First Language, Brown does not list a page of examples of stage one. They're buried in essays. And he'll be talking about stage 4. He said, whereas in stage 1 we find all gone use non-oppositionally, and that's a technical term. So where these things are all buried through Brown. It's like going through a maze. How many of you have been forced to read First Language? Veterans. Yes. Brown died. He died about 18 months ago. He was 79. He had renounced all his work and said it was wrong. No, no. Excuse me. You know, St. Thomas Aquinas' dying words. Many of you remember how important St. Thomas Aquinas was in Catholic theology, and in fact, in many ways today still is. And his dying words were, "All I have written is chaff." And one adds carefully to note that he didn't say any of it was wrong. Okay, the mean length of utterance, 1.75 words, and the main theme for this period of language acquisition is agent, action, and object. And look at the examples here. Find it. See our little pivots? Hide it, fix it, mine. All gone, up here, over there. Now, how do you know this is being a syntax? Kids don't say here up. They already have a set switch in there that knows that the preposition goes before the adverb. And you don't get them saying, "It's here up, Daddy." They say, "It's up here." And these are things in which they do not make an error. It's just remarkable what we've learned about language. And Chomsky is the one who showed everybody this, and he turned around the course of language studies in the early 1950s. He made the old senior linguists sound like stuttering chickadees. And Brown was directly dependent upon Chomsky. Okay. What's the morphology like here? Now, morphology means word forms. Well, we have mine, we have a past participle, an irregular past participle. We have up here, over there, which is, you know, how you combine those unbound morphemes there. So that's pretty nice. I mean, you know, mine, you know, is kind of neat at that stage. By the way, I was in Perth, Australia, eating in an outdoor Italian restaurant after an all-day seminar, and I was really whooped. And it wasn't this seminar, but it was a seminar about early language. And all day long we did early language, and this little kid in the adjoining booth, we were outside, adjoining table, grabbed one of the chairs and he yelled 4 times loudly, "Mine." He said, "Mine, mine, mine, mine." And the speech therapist with me said, "Bruce, you've got to find out how old he is." Well, we asked, and his birthday was going to be in 2 months, so he was 22 months. And he was really richly crying out "mine" and was very happy. That's pivot. That's one word, and it's a pivot, and it means this is mine. You know, and he'll be saying more soon. But that's how he's starting. And now our kids with disabilities, when we start them out, we give them chocolate cake. I'm not kidding. You know, we do. That's a high motivational noun. Chocolate cake. It may be a high motivational noun, but it has very little to do with how children use language. It is, in fact, an adult hypothesis of what will excite and entertain the child. I think we need to know what children really say, because the language they really use, I think, will be the motivating language. By the way, in terms of schedules of reinforcement, if you have chocolate cake on the board and the kid hits chocolate cake and it's not produced immediately, the next time the kid hits chocolate cake and it's not produced immediately, he'll never hit it again. There's no quicker way to suppress behavior than non-reinforcement, of it, and other behaviors are also commonly being reinforced. And so, if you have all these food items, kids won't hit them. I think there are a million reasons why chocolate cake is not a good first word. Is there syntactical awareness? Well, there certainly seems to be a budding subject-verb-objectness here. And we see this is probably some form of a subject, and then there's find it, okay. And see daddy, there's verb and object, okay. What word appears more frequently than any other in this small sample? It. Why is this word so rarely seen on language boards? Well, it's rarely seen on language boards because it's very difficult to illustrate. And we're also kind of been special edified, or E-D-U-C-A, or edified, by being taught to teach concepts, that the concept is more important. Well, what actually we're taught to teach is certain kinds of labeling and some other things, but I lost my track right there. It can, I was once giving a seminar, and a very wise and very successful in AAC special educator said, Bruce, never use it. She said, it doesn't mean anything. It has no referent. It's not worthwhile teaching. You see, she was thinking that you're teaching, when you teach a word, you're teaching a thing, like cup, phone. But you see, language is a system, and it doesn't mean anything, but it is like a 0 in the number system. What's the difference between 1 and 1, 0? By her logic, there'd be no difference. 1, 0, 0, add as many zeros as you want. It doesn't mean anything. Well, of course, 0 plays a role within the system. Do you see what I mean? 0 plays a very important role within the system. And I think we need to represent it, and I think we need to represent it early. And I think we need to give kids access to those words they build pivot grammars around. And if they're already 6 or 7 years old, I think we need to help them start building their own little pivot grammars, because I assure you, when they do the interactive part of that, all of that stuff will fall into place in their heads. Okay, but this word is rarely seen on language boards because quite often we don't think about language. Do you see what I mean? We think about other things, not the system of language, and it's a word's role in language. The fact that it is a key pivot. Why is it a key pivot? Because it can be used to describe anything, and its subject and object forms are the same. I mean, it is crying out to be used as a pivot. It's hide it. Put it away. So, as you're using put, you need a pivot to put, you see what I mean? Like put it away, that put away. You see, the it is the pivot that holds that together. Okay. Now, this is the last example of child sophistication I'm going to give you, and this is a doozy of child sophistication. That's Daddy's nose. Now, this was at 21 to 30 months. There were 3 children in Brown's study. There was Adam, Eve, and Sarah. Eve was the most precocious, Adam second, and then Sarah was the third. So it would be Sarah going, you see, this one was 18 months, that would have been Sarah, that would have been Eve, and 27 months would have been Sarah. You see, they all took 3 months. Eve was 21 months coming into stage 2, and Sarah was 3 months coming into stage 2, and Sarah was 3 months. Sarah and Eve have graduated from Ivy League schools, and so this is utterly normal development. They all got to the same place at the end, and so whether you start this at 21 months or at 30 months, these kids were utterly normal, and they all went on to have university careers, and this was done in the early 70s, so these guys are now, middle-aged. And okay, but let's take a look at this. That's Daddy's nose. What is remarkable about that? Well, first, the child distinguishes between S as a possessive and S as a contraction for is. That's pretty neat. That's Daddy's nose. But that isn't all that's going on here. there are two types of, there are two S sounds. One is called voiced, which is Z, and one is called voiceless, which is S. It'll show you this with T's and D's. Duh. You say it after me. Duh. Do you hear your vocal?